Hi guys, it's Rory here and welcome to the Football Heritage Podcast. Hope you're enjoying everything that our fantastic podcast has to offer so far this year. Firstly, I'm here to tell you that our brand new patron exclusive feed, the Football Heritage Extra, is now live. You can subscribe for £3 per month and that gives you access to an additional exclusive podcast every Thursday. We've designed our patron exclusive content to be a wee bit more casual, more niche and full of exclusive insights and interviews with our friends, contributors and other people working within football. Links to subscribe are in all of our episodes, show notes as always. Looking forward to seeing you over there. Secondly, if you enjoyed last week's show, it would mean the world to us if you could leave a review on Apple and Spotify, or if you're listening on YouTube, a comment and a like. It really helps the algorithm pick us up and does so much for pushing us in front of new listeners every week. Please remember as well to leave a comment on our episodes on whichever platform you're listening on. One of our favourite things is engaging with you guys and being able to speak with you about the conversations that we're having every week. Lastly, please remember to visit our website to read our articles and see what other projects we're working on at the moment. Or if you like, come and join us on our social media for daily posts and content related to the heritage of football across the world. We're always up for a chat, so if you have any questions, suggestions or feedback, feel free to DM us on any of our socials or email us at hello@footballheritage.co.uk. I think that's about everything that I need to plug at the moment. Thanks once again for listening. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome back to the Football Heritage Podcast. I'm your host Rory Bryce and I'm joined this morning by Richard Popple.
Hey Rory, how are you?
I'm good, Richard. How's yourself?
Yeah, very good. Not too bad at all, thank you. Good to be here.
Good, yeah. Thank you very much for joining us. Richard is the founder of the Football Pilgrims, which is a new project manifested in the form of an app, which is designed to educate and, I guess, bring to light the histories and the heritages of different clubs around the country, starting with Arsenal Football Club, which is the first club that you've chosen to focus on. But obviously, by nature of your project, Richard, and the app that you've made around it, this is right up our street. So I wanted to get you on to talk about why you decided to set up this app and what your long-term ambitions for the Football Pilgrims actually is. Before we kick things off properly, though, tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself and your background within football and history and media and all the things that we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, well, my background really is in the arts, kind of like first and foremost, a performer, writer, digital maker, whatever that might mean, and podcaster, which obviously everyone seems to be these days. So that's my background. That's my kind of like job, day to day, a kind of a freelance arts creative, I suppose, really. But football has always been a huge passion of mine. I grew up in Suffolk and Ipswich Town are my hometown team. So going to Portman Road from pretty early on, to be honest. I think I was about 8 when I went to my first game and stuff. So supported them through a pretty successful period in their history, and then they had a pretty bad 20 years, and then they've picked up again recently. Football's always been kind of around me, and going with my dad and family and friends and stuff as a kid and things. It leaves a bit of a print. So even though you go away and have life experiences and all the rest of it, you're kind of always drawn back to that place. And I don't particularly have family in Ipswich anymore, but I'm still drawn back, to the football club. So I think the combination of sort of storytelling, which is my sort of job, and my passion for football, I guess was always going to collide at some point. It's a subject matter that I'm sort of interested in. I'm interested in impact off the pitch kind of as much as on it, because as fans we get obsessed with the results and whether our team is doing well or not, winning trophies or not, but fundamentally the seasons always end and there's always another one coming. So to me, football, as you get older, it doesn't become quite so much about the results, really. It becomes more about, why am I still so invested in it? Why do I care so much? And what is it that draws me back into these football clubs? So I think as a maker, I wanted to sort of create something that tied in with some of that and explored some of that. So initially, about 3 years ago, I started to make a project about Ipswich Town specifically, because they were on this trajectory, which obviously took them to the Premier League last season. But at that time, they were in League One when I started that project. But you could tell that after 20 years, they had turned a corner. And it was because of investment, fundamentally. But what I was investigating with that podcast series was basically the impact on the town itself, like a place like a lot of them in the UK, which high streets have been decimated, local government funding has been pulled. All of these things which have meant that those kind of places have really suffered over the last 20 years, and Ipswich was no different. and it kind of lost its identity a bit. It felt like it didn't really know what it was anymore. And I think some of that was tied to the football club losing its identity as well, because it's such a big part of that community and probably the thing that the town is most famous for. So I did a whole series exploring the impact of the club, the ups and downs of it on the town itself, on the community, on local businesses, politics a little bit, and obviously the fans as well. So that took me to lots of different places, loads of different conversations with different stakeholders. And it was really fascinating. So I put together that series, which is called Rolling with the Punches. We made that in the end of 2024. So it came out sort of end of 2024, 25, early 25. And it did great. It did really well with the Ipswich fan base in particular. And there is still hope for that project to, go to other places. But it does take a lot of investigating to do that kind of thing properly and to really get into the nuts and bolts of a place and a community and the businesses and the people that live there and breathe all of that. So even though I had a connection to Ipswich in terms of growing up there, I don't live there anymore. So it was really important for me to get back in there and speak to people who are on the ground right now. And I loved it. I just really loved that experience. It helped me reconnect with my football club. And it sort of made me think about why we do put ourselves through it all and go through the ups and downs and everything else, and what actually really matters. And I think that led me to think, where else could I, try and discover some of those stories, and where could I make something that lots of fans could pick up on? And that's where we got to the kind of like Football Pilgrims model a couple of years later.
Fascinating. A lot of really good points that you've raised there, Richard. I think one of the ones that I like the most is that, football leaves a print. And the print isn't just the result that happens on the pitch, it's the match day experience. It's knowing that you are taking a part in something that is part of where you're from. And it's the kind of place theory that I'm most interested in. That's what I focused on during my master's thesis. And the place theory plays a massive part in how we feel as football supporters, because this club is representing our town. And when they win, the whole town's in a high, etc. But what's interesting for me is that by going into the intersection of the football club between different elements, so like politics, like socio-political contexts, like history and heritage, you can discover so much more about the town, the place, the people. It's a great way of being able to study history, is looking at your football club, where your football club was founded, and actually understanding more about the place that you're from just by looking at the football club. And that's what I like most about Football Pilgrims, is that, yes, it's doing this through the match day experience, but you're showing people a little bit more. We always talk in this show about our pre-match rituals. So, we all walk down the same streets, we all go to the same pubs, the same restaurants, to go to the same place, to sing the same songs for 90 or so minutes every single week. But not a lot of people know why they do that. They just do it because it's either habit or it's been passed down to them. Not a lot of people know the history of the places around their football clubs, what used to surround it, or if your football club's moved, where they used to be based. And Football Pilgrims, to me, is the perfect bridge to help people understand that.
Yeah, we certainly hope so. And I think you make a great point there. People don't necessarily know the areas. And I think that's particularly true for clubs. Obviously, we've started with a very big football club in Arsenal and a global football club. So Arsenal have a huge amount of fans, obviously, around the world. And a lot of people will visit the stadium and come to maybe a game if they're lucky to get a ticket. I think that's a whole other conversation about, how people actually get hold of tickets and the affordability of the whole thing. But I think we know that the non-match day audience flock to these places because they see these stadiums as these kind of, pilgrimages, fundamentally. They come to them because they are at the end of their journey. And often coming to a football ground is part of somebody's trip to the UK, even if they're not coming to a match. So I think it is tapping into that, and also tapping into this kind of reconnection. So it's a new connection potentially for a visiting fan or a tourist fan that we want to help them explore through our experiences and our gameplay. But it's also the reconnection to fans who do that journey, as you just mentioned, every single home game potentially, walk those streets, but maybe, and I don't want to use this cliche, but don't look up or don't look around, don't look at those little relics that are all over the place that are connected to an area. And if a football club has been there for 100 years, it makes sense that there's going to be connections to the football club. And also that can tell you, lots about bygone eras of football, when players used to go to pubs and things like that, and there wasn't social media and all those kind of things. And I think for fans, that's hardcore fans or people that have been season ticket holders for 30, 40, 50 years maybe may know all of that stuff before and have perhaps got used to the idea of, oh yeah, that's where so-and-so lived, or, they used to play football around here or whatever. But I think for newer fans, that's really exciting to actually bring a whole area to life, so that when you're making that journey from a train station or through a park or through a residential street, you're not just walking and looking at the pavement and waiting to get to the stadium. The whole kind of area is alive because it's ingrained within the football club's heritage and history.
Exactly. I think perspective is important as well. Like, as football fans, because of our own match day routines, we can get quite caught up in what we do ourselves. And, by the time you've had a couple in the pub, you've had your food, and a haze starts to kick in when you get into the ground, you really just kind of feel like you're on autopilot walking up to the game.
Yeah.
But I'm a Celtic fan. And when you think about it, there's maybe 5 or 6 different ways that you can approach the ground. There's from the Gallowgate, there's from Dalmarnock Station, London Road, the Forge, or you can climb the wall at the graveyard and come in literally through the back. And if you only have ever went from one way, depending on where you live, then you won't know the other approaches to the ground that other people experience as well. So for people who want to find out more about the different areas, and Celtic's a really good case study for this, I think, because the whole area around Celtic Park, what used to be the Calton, one of Glasgow's industrial suburbs, has been completely decimated compared to what it used to be. There's only some remnants really of the Calton that are left, but if you actually go to these different areas to try and get an understanding of how different people experience their match days, then it, in my opinion, can make it much more rewarding for you, because in a way you're kind of piecing together the rest of the heritage of your football club by understanding the other approaches that people make to the ground.
Absolutely. I think it's an amazing point. And yeah, I think you're right. Celtic would be really fascinating because of that. And I think clubs that still are within the geography that they kind of always were make much more interesting case studies, and they, it's much clearer obviously to see those stories and to tap into the journeys that the fans have made for decades. And I think that ties into the fact that most fans normally sit in the same place in the stadium, don't they, each week, particularly season ticket holders obviously. But even as a kid, we never had a season ticket at Ipswich, but we would normally sit in the same area every week. And therefore, you don't have the same experience or connections to the fans on the other side, even though you're supporting the same team.
Correct.
So I think there's something kind of interesting about that, because, each ground will have a noisy section, a family-friendly section, maybe more visiting supporters section. And I think for clubs, when they truly come together, you've got that sense of one, around. And normally that's at a time where teams are doing fairly well on the pitch. But I think there's also that thing of when clubs get it right and they communicate properly with their fans, and the PR is nice and, not too corporate-y, and it's a bit more transparent, they're a bit more open. I think that allows for opportunities for connection. And I think we're just trying to tap into that outside the stadium, in the streets around those areas. And I think you're right. I think fans experiencing different routes to the ground. Arsenal's another good example of this. They've got 3 different tube stops in London surrounding them. Fans literally come from different areas to go there, and they're all converging through the little streets of London and, all the rest of it into this huge stadium at the end of it. So there's a really sort of visceral experience to the whole thing. And it's quite epic, really, particularly if you've not been to a big stadium for a while. It's like, oh, all of a sudden out of these streets comes this huge stadium. And Celtic Park, similar, Ibrox, wherever, you go to these big grounds that are still embedded in the community. It still is an incredible experience, even if you've done it hundreds of times before.
Yeah, that's what really, I don't know if surprise is the right word, but I remember when I went down to Everton v Man United last year, when I first saw Goodison, I was like, oh wow, it is literally, you could throw a stone from the pub across the road or the house across the road and literally hit the stadium. That was incredible. Never seen anything like that before, so close to those houses. But you're right. And obviously, we've spoken in this show before about, how fans display their identities, how they take ownership over the heritages of their football clubs. And this is quite an important point, particularly within the context of what we would call elite clubs within Europe now, especially clubs at the top level, both in Scotland and in England. Obviously, you have the club-led museums or the club-led heritage initiatives where they can pick and choose what they put into it. What I've found with Celtic is that the fan-led heritage initiatives are the ones that are, for me anyway, the best, because the club doesn't have a museum and any sort of historic items are behind the paywall of a stadium tour. Mm-hmm. And they don't do a huge amount out with the social media to promote the history of the club anyways. So it's the fan-led tours, the fan museums and things like the Football Pilgrims that for me make it a lot more special because it's bringing that connectivity back. Now, you mentioned storytelling has been a big part of what you do, and storytelling is huge within Heritage because it's the best medium to convey the ideas and the concepts that we're talking about here. What was it that, I guess, inspired you to make Football Pilgrims something that was a learning tool for people to engage with the histories and the heritage of their football clubs through storytelling? Tell us a little bit about the Gunners Way and where you got the idea from.
Yeah, so the format of the game is a sort of digital trail. So basically, players play on their mobile phone, but they are playing in the real world. The route is playable in the real world. So it's interactive, it's entertaining, and there is a story that's driving the whole thing. So each game will have a host, a sort of digital host that is kind of like guiding you, coaching you through that experience. And you as the players, you as the fans, are obviously testing your knowledge. Your fandom is kind of like on the line. You want to beat your mates to show who's got more appreciation, maybe of historical moments or heritage moments. And yeah, that gamified kind of pub quizzy sort of element to it. But you can play it as a team, you can play it as an individual. But I think we wanted to capture that sense of fans know stuff. They know stuff, but also obviously we all don't know everything, and some of us haven't been to football museums or sat down with real long-term books and sort of historical documents and all the rest of it. So we wanted to create something that was a bit more 2026, a bit more digital fan engagement, because that's how, let's be brutally honest, most fans consume their football content these days. But we also wanted something in the real world that physically connected them with each other and with their football club's community and local area. So that's why we combined that into that format. And I think the Gooners Way started because at the time when we first started development, I was living very close to the Emirates Stadium. So I am also a bit of a fan of Arsenal as well. So I do have two clubs. I have Ipswich and Arsenal. But I have supported them for a very long time. I must say that. Also, there was no glory hunting for a long time because they weren't winning anything. But yeah, so I think following on from my Ipswich project, I'd learned so much about the impact on a community in all sorts of really surprising ways. And I don't know if you know, but politically at the moment, Ipswich is quite interesting because of the thing that happened with obviously reform last week, but also because it's on the shortlist for the City of Culture Award, which I found out during making the podcast series from the local MP. So there's a lot going on with that kind of story at the moment. And the football club, as I've mentioned, because of its kind of iconic status in that town and county, has a big impact on the perception of that place. Hence why the furore around Mr. Farage's visit last week was so topically debated. But with Arsenal, having finished that project, I always used to walk past the Emirates on my way home from work. And you would always see, whether it was raining, whether it was sunny, cold, hot, whatever, certainly non-match days, you would always see people outside the stadium. Now, some of them probably would have been going on a stadium tour. As you've mentioned, the club prescribed stuff, which are great and they're really worth doing. But lots of them literally just come because they want to take a photograph. They want to be in the physical space of that football club and feel the energy around that, which is kind of constant for clubs like Arsenal because there's a constant stream of sort of fans. So I think because I started to understand the importance of these anchor kind of buildings, these heritage buildings that football stadiums are, I just thought people are coming here like a beacon constantly to Arsenal. So then I just basically started to research the area a little bit to think about, obviously, Highbury. Old Highbury is right close by. Obviously, it's a block of flats now or a square of flats, but you can still see they've still got the original roof on the stadium and stuff, and they've still got the facade down the right-hand side as well. So it's still a beautiful kind of like relic to 100 years of Arsenal history, and then the new stadium's around the corner. They've also got the new murals that they put up in 2023 as part of a revamp of Emirates Stadium. Emirates is now 20 years old, so it felt like a good time to kind of like hit that landmark as well. And of course, Arsenal are on the rise, and sort of they're coming back to kind of where they were and potentially going even further with the fact that they're doing well in Europe and stuff. So it felt like a good time to focus on them. And I think Arsenal are also a club that have always put a great deal of scope on the wider picture of their football club. The women's team are probably the biggest, most historical in the UK. Arsenal in the Community is a fantastic organisation. They've done a huge amount of work in the local area. And just as I've mentioned before, the geography of the area is interesting because there's so many routes coming around that stadium and stuff. So that's the reason why I basically chose Arsenal. And of course, sort of being a fan, I had a sense of the history anyway. And obviously had to do a lot of research and diving into stuff and, the move from Woolwich and all the rest of it. So I then had to sort of gather all that information, think, okay, what can I cram into a sort of 60 to 90-minute experience? What can I make live and exciting for people to play and, test their knowledge on and learn about, but also have fun with, which is really important, make it engaging. And then we basically started to plot a route and think, okay, we'll send them to this landmark. We want them to go here. We have to see this place. We want them to experience that, all of those things. And then you basically start building a story around that. And then we did a lot of testing, basically, over sort of a 6 to 9 month period to where we are now, where we've released the first version of the game. And at the moment, we're collating sort of information from fans, how they feel about it, what their experience is, what they'd like to see more of, less of, etc. And hopefully that's the sort of catalyst for us to move forward and do other football clubs.
Yeah, exactly. It's really interesting. And you mentioned a lot about, anchor buildings, landmarks and things that people can actually go and see. I was involved in a project in Glasgow called Football Square Mile, which is something along the same lines. It's branded as the world's largest open-air football museum, where you can walk around. It's not even a square mile, it's quite a large radius, but you can walk around these different QR codes on lampposts within the city, scan them, and it'll tell you a little bit about the football history of that area and how it relates to Queen's Park, the advent of the passing game and how they took it across the world, etc. But obviously, we've got the benefit of hindsight nearly 200 years later. A lot of these buildings no longer exist anymore. Sadly, a lot of the landmarks no longer exist anymore either. And one of the things that we had to work around was, well, how do we engage with people when what they are staring at is no longer this beautiful tenement Victorian townhouse, but one of the busiest thoroughways within the city centre, where it's not really safe, but when you scan that QR code, what's it going to tell you and what's it going to show you and help you imagine what was there? So in terms of these anchor points, how is it that you go about showing people and telling people what was there that relates to the football club when, for example, it might be a modern new build, it might be new flats, student accommodation, whatever?
Yeah, really good question. I think Arsenal are interesting in this sense because obviously the first 20 years of their history, they were in South London. So the geography is just not, we don't really touch upon that point anyway. We obviously mentioned the fact that they are from, Woolwich and moved to the area. But I think from the point of view of kind of like relics that we have available, we very much want people to experience what's in front of them and to interact with what's in front of them. So we don't really touch upon stuff which was there beforehand. We sometimes use video to kind of like go back and say, there are a couple of like time spots basically where people play a video and they're standing in the spot from where the video was taken. So obviously shop fronts might look a little bit different. A couple of pubs have changed names, all that kind of stuff. But it's quite nice actually to stand in that spot and actually see things that have remained the same as well. So it gives people that sense of time, but also a connection back to significant moments in Arsenal's history. But generally speaking, we want people to interact with kind of like what's in front of them. So Arsenal, Highbury Stadium, for example, you can still use the facade of the stadium around the side. You don't need to show them a picture or take them back to a video of like Highbury as it used to look like, because the outside kind of looks similar to what it did before. So we're using what we've got, and I think it's important for us to layer the story over that and to make it as engaging as possible in terms of the storytelling, because then you can really take people on you can ask them to use their own imagination. We're really trying to tap into their experience of their football clubs. So, their first moments with the club, the first time they went to a stadium, their favorite player, why they might choose a shirt number, favorite colors associated with the club, favorite players associated with the club, whatever, all of those memories that we all have, we're sort of using those moments within the game for them to kind of drive the narrative almost, because then it'll unlock something. Seeing something in the real world is like, oh yeah, I remember when I first saw that player, or I first, came to Highbury for the first time or watched a game, all of those kind of like memories that we all have. So Yeah, for us, it's about placing the player right in the center of the gameplay and letting them explore the narrative through their kind of lens, rather than sort of hand holding them and saying, go over here, this is blah, blah, blah. And it's a piece of history that's a bit nebulous because, as you say, some buildings or relics might not be there anymore.
Yeah, it's all about that connectivity, and I guess what you're really looking to do is tap into those personal heritages that people have with their football clubs to give them that connectivity. And for me, it's like you said at the beginning of our conversation here, as you get older, you start to realise that football just isn't about the results. There's a reason that you keep coming back, and it's about exploring those reasons why. That, for me, is what makes it interesting. It's about knowing that on X Street in Glasgow, or where I'm from in Lanarkshire, in X Street, there used to be a football club here, or a football ground, or someone who I went to school with, great, whoever played on this pitch, etc. That's what makes it interesting for me, and place is the main catalyst and driver for being able to teach people that, in my opinion. But within that, it's important that people know the history of their football clubs as well. And I'd like to think that as people grow older, as they get life experience and actually start to experience history themselves within their football clubs, that's just as important as, when you're a young fan, you're just starting to get involved within the game and turning up because you want to see your team win.
Yeah, I think you're right, and an age, that's the benefit of age, isn't it? That you're right. We create our own history with the club. So, I'm about to have a kid, and if he gets into football, he's going to have a very different experience of if he supports my teams of my teams than I did. And it's going to be, going back to your point about how things looked before. I would be able to show him a photograph of Portman Road in 1999 or Highbury in 2002 or whatever, and it would be great. It'd be a nice thing for him to be able to see, but at the same time, his experience of it will be completely different from that. And so your own kind of history really matters. And I think as you get older, because the results, I mean, I don't want to speak for every football fan. For some football fans, it's the be all and end all, and that's totally fine. That's a way of supporting a football club. But I think when you do realise that those euphoric highs or those crushing lows of a Sunday evening or whatever literally last for an evening, and then the next day you don't care less, you do ask yourself, well, okay, but why am I going back this week again? And I think place is absolutely right. It's really, really important, but so are people. And I think that's why we've chosen to make something that is digital in form, but is an in-person experience, because you can play our games on your own if you want to. That's totally fine. But I think when you're playing together and you're testing each other and you're challenging each other and you're answering questions in different ways and talking about experiences in different ways, that's when you really get a full picture of how a football club can have impact, particularly if you're from different parts of the country or the world. That's when you really understand the impact of these places, because everybody will have a different experience and a different history with it. So place is really important, but I think people, massively matter. I don't know how you got into supporting your club, but mine was through my family. And that matters, particularly as you get older and people get older and stuff. It's like those connection points really, really do matter. And it might not be because the team is, as I say, winning or losing. It's just like, do you remember when we went to see blah, 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 and a certain player, I got to see great Man United teams in the 1990s at Portman Road as a kid. Like, it was incredible. Eric Cantona, like 5 meters away from me and stuff. And the person sitting next to me was my dad, and that matters. Those memories really, really matter. So yeah, it's I think football histories, you create your own as you get older, and then hopefully you tap back into a little bit further. And I think you look at social media now with how kit culture has become such a big thing, and people love it, the retro kind of like styles and stuff, and that is a way for them to go back in time a little bit and to look at 80s football or 70s football. And then they're like, okay, well, how did my team do during those decades and stuff? And then you're starting to get into the weeds of another period, another time. And I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, 100%. One thing that we mentioned on our episode on Nairn County a couple of weeks ago is that, they're a club in the Highland League in Scotland. They've only ever won the Highland League once. So, for most of their history, they've very much just kind of been there. But what the point of our conversation was that if you've built a community around your football club, then fans will turn up regardless of how the team is performing, because they know that the club are investing in you. as well as you investing in them. And that's massively important for how people feel connected to their towns, to their clubs, and to the football that they're actually consuming as well. You know, some of our listeners will know that I'm from a mixed family. So dad's family are all Rangers fans, mum's family are all Celtic. Luckily got the better side. But when I was younger, my dad would take me to like lower league Scottish football games. So we would go to like Stranraer, we'd go to Albion Rovers, Airdrie, and that has lasted for me. I still enjoy going to those clubs because Glasgow was too far away, too expensive to get a ticket. They tried to, show me different football and experiences. And it was amazing because I remember the first time I went to Celtic Park, I was like, oh, you can't have a ball and kick it around at the side of the pitch? Like,
yeah. Absolutely.
So you're right, like your own personal experience of football is massively important. And I think the more football you experience out with your immediate club, your immediate ground, and that goes for away days and everything as well, the more it enriches your experience as a football fan and the more that you feel connected to the game. And for me, including educational elements surrounding heritage and engagement within our football consumption is so important for us, I guess, not just connecting to our clubs and learning about our football clubs, but also retaining what we think is the soul of the game, because that is being lost more and more within commercialization. But for me, that is the one thing that is keeping us connected to what football should be.
Yeah, they're the only businesses in the world that we support. Like it's a really odd concept, really, if you think about it. And I think that at the top level of the game as well, the players and the staff within the club at the higher level, obviously the managers, the players, etc., are on such enormous amounts of money that they're so disconnected from where most people are in their lives and in terms of their social sort of like setup and stuff. So there has to be something more, because otherwise it's kind of slightly grotesque, isn't it? The idea of being really happy and supporting and cheering and your mood being affected by people who are running around as millionaires. It's a bit of an odd concept. So I think to square that circle in all of our minds, you're right. There has to be a bigger thing underneath the whole picture for us to kind of forget about that layer of it. Because I think when we are reminded of football being a business and its corporate, social responsibility and stuff, and that goes wrong, a la with Ipswich over the last week, it has such an enormous impact on the way people feel. And that's because it's the way they feel about their football club and they feel about their identity to it and what it means to them. So, yeah, it's incredibly significant to connect, I think, with the history and to allow that to kind of like drip feed into hopefully how you move forward as a supporter and kind of like what you put as what's important to you and stuff. But obviously, as I said before, that's not for everyone. And I know Football Pilgrims will not be for everybody at all. Lots of football fans literally just, their routine is what matters to them, and going to the game and being on the stands and everything else. But yeah, the history side of it and just allowing yourself to be wrapped up in that and your experiences of it. I think, as you spoke about, going to those games, kicking the ball around the side of the pitch, it's lovely. It's like that's the grassroots of the game that clubs bang on about all the time. And when they get it right, you see the significance of it. When they don't, you absolutely see the significance of it. And it can be a real negative spiral and a real trust problem between supporters and football clubs. So yeah, the community element of it and bringing that to life in a really live way is really important to us.
Yeah, I'd completely agree. Just to come back to the Gunners Way, obviously, you mentioned you tested it for a few months, but this is your first foray with the Football Pilgrims project. What have you learned from it so far? What kind of things are you going to implement for the next project? Because obviously, you've plotted a route here. People are able to go walking or jogging or whatever around that route while learning a little bit more about the football club and play it in a competitive way with their mates. If they want to, they can do it on match days, etc. What things are you going to implement for the next project? Are you going to implement more fan stories within it? What are the things that we've been talking about? Or has the feedback so far been pretty good and consistent with what you thought it would be?
Yeah, some of the feedback has been really good. Is it consistent with what we thought it would be? No, not necessarily. I think because we've created something that we are trying to reach quite a broad range of an audience.
Yep.
We know that there has to be changes to future iterations, and I think most of that is about accessibility. So, language, for example, it's in English. So at the moment, we know that you need to be able to understand English very well to be able to play the game. So obviously, moving forward, we want this to be something that can be accessible to people who are coming here to visit. We want different versions in different languages so that people can play. And I think also the accessibility thing is important too, because most routes, because we've looked at another couple of clubs in London that might be follow-ups to the Gooners Way. And it's important to us that you can get around this route no matter what your situation is. And I think for the Arsenal game that we have at the moment, we have created a version that has some accessibility issues potentially. It's a very easy fix, but it might mean that the route needs to change and stuff. And we kind of knew that beforehand, but that's something that we really need to be very mindful of moving forward, because most football clubs, particularly if they're building new stadiums, have to have that right as a point of, some of the older stadiums within streets and stuff tend to have some accessibility issues occasionally. So we've got to be really mindful of that, because we want to be a very it has to be an inclusive experience, because that's exactly what it is. And I think fan voices, as you mentioned, we absolutely do want fan voices, more fan voices moving forward, because I had a connection with Arsenal Football Club. It was quite easy for me to tap into the heritage and history and to know where to go, who to speak to, and to try and get those connection points so that we could build those into the game. I, for example, don't have that knowledge about Celtic Football Club. So I would come to somebody like yourself, Rory, and ask, in a consultantry kind of way, where would I go? What would you recommend? Who do I need to speak to? All of that kind of stuff. So I think, like I did with the Ipswich podcast, it was those connections and conversations that led me to other surprising connections and conversations that helped me craft that story and that narrative across the podcast series. And it will be exactly the same when we make new versions of Football Pilgrims, because we want them to be authentic. We want them to be used by lots of different types of fans, as I've mentioned, visitor fans, match day goers on a regular basis, families, etc. So they have to have that authenticity. They have to have a sense of belonging to the people. And I think that's a really important point. It kind of comes back to what you mentioned earlier with, football museums and things like that, and club stadium tours created by the club. They're often brilliant, and they've often got the relics and all the stuff that we would never have access to, and they are great. But the narratives are normally quite controlled. They're normally quite staid and a bit, black and white. We have the opportunity as fans to use our own stories and our histories and stuff to create quite fun, exciting, inventive, interactive narratives. And I think we know we've done that with the Gooners Way, but there are learning points where we want to jump off even further into that. And moving forward into other pilgrimages with other football clubs, we absolutely will be wanting fan voices to help us do that.
Yeah, I think the fan ownership side of things for me is one of the most important, because it's through them that you get the true stories of connection. It's a huge thing for me with Celtic and Rangers. Obviously, the sectarian issue is something that the clubs dance around. For me, as unfortunate as it is, it's not something that can be avoided, and it needs to be addressed. Otherwise, people are just going to be pissed off that you're not speaking about it, because they feel so strongly about that issue. And it's never something that's brought up within club discourses. What is the plan for the next project within the Football Pilgrims? What is the next pilgrimage going to be? Have you got any ideas so far?
Yeah, the long-term ambitions, we want to get to obviously as many clubs as we possibly can. But I think short-term, so yes, geography matters, because I'm about to have family. Yes. So the ability to travel and stuff is going to be difficult. But I think the good thing is, because of the model that we're trying to build by leaning on people or working with people, I shouldn't say leaning on people, but collaborating and working with people who are in the areas that we want to work in, means that we can probably be a bit more remote. I mean, I think it is important for us to be in those places and feel that community, where's good to go, who do we need to speak to, the businesses, etc. Because I think that's part of making the experiences that we want to make. But because we're going to be using fan voices in those areas, connection points in those areas, that means that we can work a little bit more distantly, potentially at times. But right now we have a couple of clubs in London that we are looking at, that may be the next ones. We are also looking at Euro 2028. Nice. And potentially focusing on the grounds that they are using throughout the UK at that point. So that might be a bigger long-term project whilst we drip different clubs out over the next 2 or 3 years or whatever. Well, 2 years, because 2028 is not that far away. But that might be the longer term project, and that would help us go to different parts of the UK, which is 100% the ambition.
That would be brilliant. I guess what's quite useful is, there's this idea within heritage studies of ethnography and phenomenology where you really need to be somewhere and in that place to experience what it's actually like instead of reading it. But the benefit of this is that you can do research, you can speak with people and not send them out. It makes it sound like the employees, but you can use these people to get the information that you need from the best perspective because they're the fans, and then just pay a visit. So it's ideal that you're able to do it both remotely with the occasional visit to the place that you're going. I think it's a really, really good model, and like I said, I'm quite excited for where the app's going.
Fantastic. Yeah. No, I agree, and I think that to me is quite an exciting part of making anyway, because you're not constantly relying on, making the Gooners Way was really fun for me on a personal level.
Yeah.
But actually, when we started to research a couple of other clubs that we might be looking at, of course, I just don't have that knowledge. I know things and I know stories and stuff, and I've been to those grounds. I've watched football matches at those grounds. But yeah, you got to get into the weeds of it. And to do that, you absolutely need genuine voices that do it time and time again. And yeah, as a maker, as a sort of like storyteller and maker, that back and forth with somebody who maybe is on the ground and then you're on the ground at sometimes with them and stuff, that's exciting because then you see it from a completely different perspective and you're not having a sort of like biased approach to it all the time where it's like, oh, well, we did it for this one, we did it in this way, we'll just repeat that process in another place. That's not going to work. And so the only way to do that is to have people who have got that kind of like local geography and the knowledge to be able to kind of like help us navigate it.
Yeah, 100%. And again, that's when the fan stories come into it, because as a visiting supporter, if you've only ever watched the game in the ground as an away fan, or you don't have an attachment to the club, you're a neutral, then you're approaching it from an unbiased and neutral standpoint. Whereas these people might point to a section of wall and be like, oh, this is where I had my first drink at the football, or wherever. It's those literally grassroots level stories for me that make it interesting and that play such a huge role within storytelling. Anything else that you want to add just before we finish up, Richard? This has been a really great chat, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners will be really excited for the progress of Football Pilgrims.
Yeah, no, fantastic. I mean, all I would say is, look, we've launched the Gooners Way. It's out there now that you can play it. So if you are an Arsenal fan, or if you're a fan of football culture, football heritage, and you are based in London, obviously it's playable on the streets of N5. We have a bit of a sort of offer at the moment. So we're offering a free version of the game because we are doing obviously a beta version of the game. So if you want to play, please go to footballpilgrims.com. You can sign up there very easily and you can play whenever you want. And obviously, because the weather's slightly improving now, it's probably a better time to be outdoors and to go and have some fun with your fellow Arsenal fans. But like I say, hopefully it appeals to fans of other clubs. And it would be interesting actually to have fans of other clubs play and say, I want this at my stadium, or our club would be a great place for this to work. So we want to keep making these new experiences, and yeah, we'd love people's thoughts on it. So please sign up and go and play.
Yes, please do. We'll include links to Football Pilgrims in our show notes for this episode, so anyone who listens can go and access it and go and check it out. Richard, thank you very much. This has been a fantastic chat, and thank you very much to all of our listeners who tuned in for this episode as well. If you have any questions, or if you want to suggest a topic yourself, you can DM us on our social media, or you can email us at hello@footballheritage.co.uk. Please remember to check out our exclusive Patreon feed as well. You can subscribe to that for £3 per month. That gives you an additional podcast every single week. Otherwise, we'll see you all again in the next episode. Goodbye.